So this video would probably not be happening, and neither would the video that preceded it, because I actually shot a video almost a month ago on a loosely related topic that I can't upload because the audio is too fucked up. It might not be too fucked up. I'll play a sample for you, and if you think it's decent enough, I'll put it in the unlisted box and I'll give you the link if you want to put up with obnoxious audio, because I think I really nailed the issue in that video, but I've spent the last few weeks just trying to fiddle with the audio to make it better, because I made the mistake of, it wasn't construction this time actually, it was me putting the fan too close to the camera, and I'm not using my camcorder to record videos anymore. I'm just using the phone camera, because this damn thing is pissing me off, because like I said a few videos ago, it's not letting me record over 30 minutes without splitting the damn thing into two files, and then I have to reconnect it, and it's just too annoying to do. So I'm ditching the camera and I'm using the phone to record from here on out. But see, the problem with that is I can't put the fan too close to the phone, because then it just sounds like I'm outside and the wind is annulling what I'm saying. Let me play a bit of a sample to see if it's tolerable.
And most people believe that. I don't think cultural relativism is this boogeyman that people make it out to be. No one actually believes that you have to apply non-judgmentalism across the board. They just, when they tend to be accused of being cultural relativists, well, they tend to just stray from ethnocentrism, right? So the belief that one is not an ethnocentrist, we automatically assume that there's like a false dichotomy there. You either have to be an ethnocentrist or you have to be a cultural relativist. There's a host of intermediary views, and those are interesting to debate.
So that's after I spent weeks trying to improve the audio. That's the best that I can get it to be. So let me know if that's tolerable, and I'll upload that video as an unlisted version of this video. So I'm going to try to hit many of the same points. I think you might be able to guess where those kinds of points are getting to, but they are points that sooner or later everyone's going to have to discuss. Things of that nature. And they're probably too important to be discussed with obnoxious audio quality. So I'm going to do a do-over, and hopefully I can do this topic justice. One of the things I did in the first video was actually overqualify for the topic, and that's a problem as well. We shouldn't have to throw in every conceivable caveat so as to differentiate ourselves from individuals who are glory hounds and triumphalists and in-group loyalists, people who think that in-group loyalty has some sort of intrinsic importance in terms of ethical considerations. Because that's not what I'm after with any of these topics. What I'm after is, it wouldn't even be part of the equation at all if someone like Maajid Nawaz had been successful. Maybe not fully successful, but at least if he had been making waves when it comes to the average Muslim community who has been exposed to his agenda, like if he had been making waves with his reform project. Quilliam. I'll link to Quilliam in the description section. I'm pretty sure most of you will know what that's about. It sort of exploded on the scene a couple of years back when he collaborated with Harris on the book Islam and the Future of Violence, or was it Islam and the Future of Tolerance? I forget. I think it was Islam and the Future of Violence. So he did that collab with Harris. You would have thought things would have gone in a decent direction, but here we are almost 2 years removed from that project, and Maajid is every bit as much of a pariah within the average Muslim community that's been exposed to that view as he has ever been. And if he can't be at the forefront of the reform project, who might be a decent replacement? Someone like Ayan Hirsi Ali? Well, she's right on just about every issue as well, but she comes with a bit more political baggage, and her approach is a bit more tendentious than Maajid Nawaz's approach. So I can't think of anyone other than him. He is the poster boy for something like this. And something like this does need to happen sooner than later. Because when you look at these Muslim communities, especially throughout Europe, it's where many of the problems are, You've got all sorts of retrograde views. If you believe that the Pew polls and the Gallup polls are airtight, like I do, I believe that the margin of error there is minimal. It's about as sound a methodology for gathering people's views, a glimpse into people's views. It's about as sound a methodology as you're going to get. So I think those studies are as airtight as any study can be. Gallup polls and the Pew polls. And if you look at the findings, you'll see things as horrific as over 50% of British Muslims believing that homosexuality should be legally unacceptable. You get things in the way of anti-Semitist sympathies. You get things in the way of retrograde views on apostasy, retrograde views on blasphemy. They really are humorless drones when it comes to their religion. And I complained about all this stuff back in 2010, even before a lot of these stats came out and were as solid as they are now. I complained about that, all that stuff. Patriarchal norms, far worse. Just about every single issue. Even sympathies toward radicalism. That most recent one that came out showed that over 50% of British Muslims would not convey vital information about radical sympathies to local law enforcement, insofar as it was a fellow Muslim, a fellow believer. It's all sort of stuff I complained about way back in the day that just keeps getting reinforced the more studies get done. And I would assume that the only way to think it's not a problem is to just flat out say that the studies are unreliable. I think the studies are more than reliable. They are more than reputable. And so it's not so much an epistemic problem at this point, it's a flat out ethical problem, a cooperation problem. How do we go from here on out without creating all sorts of combustible elements in the social domain, the cultural domain, if you will? Though I kind of don't like the word culture. It's probably too vague. And it's one of Douglas Murray's problems. I'm a fan of Douglas Murray because he's really making waves with this topic, but he keeps using vague terminology, and I think we can use more, we can zero in on better terminology. So that's part of what I'm going to try to get to the bottom of in this video. But another thing that motivates this video, it's not just the fact that someone like Nawaz is stuck as a pariah, like he's got pariah status and it's not changing anytime soon. He really is sort of in quicksand even. His stock keeps falling within the average Muslim community. It doesn't keep rising, so it's actually worse than just saying that he's stuck. But that's not the lone problem. The other problem plays into what's going on in our local internet scene. By which I mean, however you want to categorize it, you can categorize it as philosophical pessimism, you can categorize it as rejectionism, you can categorize it in many different ways. I think the average person watching this video will know what I'm talking about, the local scene, our sort of gatherings. And what I've noticed in the last couple of months, maybe last couple of weeks, what I've noticed is an uptick in fellow critics of procreation bemoaning the fact that this agenda of theirs hasn't progressed. It hasn't been popularized. Month after month, year after year, it's sort of wash, rinse, repeat. These debates happen. A newcomer comes along, doesn't get convinced, moves on, their audience moves on, and so on and so forth. It is fairly repetitive. And so there's sort of the view that that's something that we need to decry, and we need to try to come up with better tactics to dissuade individuals against the natalist view or some sort of a cop-out neutralist view. And so I'm just noticing an uptick in those kinds of grievances. So it's more now a sort of methodological debate. Like how do we peddle this idea better than it is just a first-order intellectual debate? And I'm going to say that that is actually borderline category error. To assume that this not spreading like wildfire poses a lethal problem. I don't think it does. I think I can actually make a case, a very counterintuitive case, that a potential lethal problem would actually be you becoming successful. You making a sort of viral video, or a book. Let's say you're working on a book that critiques procreation. And that book making it to the New York Times bestsellers and deconverting a bunch of either hardcore natalists or neutralists, just individuals who have never really thought about the topic. As it stands, birth rates across Western, non-Western countries, you average things out, are fairly imbalanced. Now, usually this gets presented as a grave concern because, again, it ties back to that glory hound problem and that triumphalism problem when it comes to things like in-group solidarity, which doesn't necessarily have to lead to out-group hostility. You can have in-group solidarity and out-group apathy. But even that's not the issue I'm posing. And that's one of the things I got bogged down in that video with the shitty quality, is I kept trying to put caveat after caveat after caveat to impress upon the viewer that I'm not in it for the in-group glory. I'm in it for something drastically different, insofar as I'm going to latch on to this concern. I'm going to latch on to it for completely different reasons. The way it's usually presented is, the primary reason is it has something to do with in-group affinity. My secondary reasons bear a superficial resemblance to that in-group affinity, but they are nonetheless secondary reasons. There is a reason to be concerned about the birth rate imbalances, and they have fuck all to do with genetic collectivism or some sort of ancestral factionalism, which is what motivates many of the people making the most noise about it. There are reasons that can, from a bird's eye view perspective, validate those concerns. And absolutely no one is coming at it from that angle. And it's a travesty. And the reason no one's coming at it from that angle is I believe that they don't want to be affiliated with the sort of mud, right, that might get thrown on them by way of superficial associations. When it comes to nativists, ethno-separatists, ethno-nationalists, all of that stuff. I don't give a fuck. Okay? I'm going to discuss the issue as I see it. Agent neutrality is the baseline. Impartiality on the political level is the secondary baseline. And I believe all of it, insofar as you care about far-sighted consequences, all of that can be justified, even though it bears some sort of superficial resemblance to ethnopolitics, individuals who want to politicize their preferences and prejudices. That's not what I'm here to politicize. I'm here to politicize something very different. Cue the laugh track if you want. Be a smartass if you want. I don't give a damn. It's juvenile. It's juvenile to pretend that there's nothing to see here, that there's nothing to discuss. There very much is. And fellow critics of procreation are sporting a blindfold. And I'll explain why. Say you have an ability to, simply with a snap of your finger, wave with a magic wand, to make the best possible anti-natalist video, let's call it. It doesn't have to be full-blown anti-natalist. It can be some sort of contingent anti-natalism or something that's anti-natalist adjacent, child-free, vehement, even though vehement is stupid for a host of reasons. But let's just say you get to make the ultimate persuasive video pitching whatever you want to pitch that ultimately loops into a critique of procreation. And you get to make that, and you get to make it go viral. Well, the obvious question you want to pose is, well, where is it going to go viral? Is it going to go viral in the regions of the world that need to hear it the most? Or is it going to go viral on the local level? Ties back to the Majid Nawaz problem. Where does Nawaz's agenda need to take off the most? Does he need a nod when it comes to the local scene, or does he need a nod when it comes to the trenches? Muslim majority country type trenches. I think if you have troubles answering a question like this, you are the problem as well. It's clear where these agendas need to take off. Even something as innocuous as turning the average devout Muslim into the average nominal Muslim. So again, ties back to the Nawaz agenda. That's what he wants to do. It's not so interesting, it's not really that interesting as to whether a moderate Muslim rejects radicalism, insofar as that moderate Muslim is still devout, because the devoutness still carries a fuckload of baggage. Baggage we typically don't want to discuss, because we want to deny the pupils. But it is the devout factor that's making those pupils what they are. It's not material conditions. It is the devout theological components. Shouldn't have to spend too much time on that. That is just the case. It's not my fault that that's the case. I'm just calling it the way I see it. It's a fucking spade, and I'm going to call it a spade. So, a moderate, non-radical Muslim who is nonetheless devout, someone like Nawaz wants to turn him into nominal. From devout to nominal, from moderate to nominal. He is failing. Likewise, what is the average antinatalist trying to do, who's really enthusiastic? What's he trying to do? Is the average antinatalist who bemoans their absence of impact, who really wants to popularize this topic, are they asking themselves the first question, the fundamental question? What is the fundamental question? Is it, how do we popularize this? Or is it, who is my audience? That's question number one. And then question number two is, well, who is my prospective audience? Were I to popularize the topic? Right? You give me a chance to create the best, most persuasive viral video, I might decline to do so, because it ties back to game theoretical considerations. We need to treat every single issue with game theoretical gloves. And all that means is that the ideal evaluation will not necessarily carry over to the ideal decision. The ideal decision can look like a 180 from the ideal evaluation. Decisional considerations and evaluative considerations are like night and day. We need to grapple with that. Give me the chance to have something go viral, and the first thing I'm asking is, where is it going to go viral? Who is it going to dissuade? This might not sound at all persuasive to you if you believe that there's no such thing as a better and a worse belief set. That all ideologies are imperfect, and that therefore they are in some way equally imperfect. Now, I don't believe that in the slightest. I believe there are less and more imperfect ideologies, and some of the most imperfect ones come in the form of Salafism, Wahhabism, just to pick the least charitable samples from that are Islamic and theologically inspired. Salafism, Wahhabism. We can get into better ones, but I don't even think it's all that interesting to do, because it ties back to the pupils. Most of those people in the pupils don't have anything in the way of sympathy towards Salafism, Wahhabism, but they are far worse on a host of these other issues that I laid out at the start of the video. And all those other issues are, in and of themselves, deal breakers for modern civil society. So, when you want to popularize something, number one, you want to skirt the possibility of idiocracy, because we think that, oh, all right, so if we, if we just convince the intellectuals, then the intellectuals will have no issues imposing their wills on the less intellectually inclined. It's sort of the same issue that we see when we think that all you have to do is convince humanity, and then rest will be slim pickings. Like, it'll be so easy to sterilize the environment. That's just background decoration. The hard part is convincing the humans. I was like, no, actually you need to map out a way that the environment can actually be sterilized, cemented, so to speak. That's the hard question. The easier question might be to get it implemented. And sort of ties back to this. Do we want to go viral in the wrong regions of the world? Do we want to write books that make it to the New York Times bestsellers list, or to whatever the equivalent of the New York Times bestsellers list is in a Muslim majority country like Indonesia, for instance? These are certainly questions worth asking. And if you're just hearing a red flag when you're hearing it asked, it probably means you're some type of egalitarian antinatalist. So you think a birth is a birth is a birth is a birth, and they're all equally bad. And ideological considerations, the likelihood of the ideology that you're going to be born into is a non-factor. Whereas I think it's the factor. And people typically understand that when you point to idiocracy, right? Like, in a weird way, the condom was not all that much of a benefit on a societal level, because the stupidest people are never going to use the condom. So there's some degree of ambiguity about the condom's goodness, and contraceptives in general. It's one step closer to idiocracy. So again, ties back to game theory. Not because the condom itself is bad, but because we have to look at the condom not from these ideal theoretical conditions, but from game theoretical conditions. Your ideal theorizing has fuck all to do with applied ethics. That's step number one, really. Once you accept that, everything else follows. And I don't see why it would be all that difficult for a largely consequentialist audience, which I believe my audience is, why that would be a sort of controversial view to accept. Alright, so first thing that has to go is this idea of an egalitarian antinatalism. We need to be inegalitarian, or even anti-egalitarian in our considerations, right? So if you could actually just spread your belief set across all Western countries versus just one Muslim majority country, right? What would you pick? Would you actually just count the beans, and would you look at it from the standpoint of just a numbers game? Well, if you take the all Western countries option, well, yeah, you'll end up with less births in the here and now. But the average Western country already has a balance when it comes to birth rates. Actually, it's not even a balance. Even that's too charitable. Whereas in non-Western regions, it's not something that you can just let slide. So even in the near term, if you sacrifice something that seems as imbalanced in terms of raw numbers as faced with an option between a whole bunch of nations versus just one nation that's more of a problem, you should go for the one nation. You should try to be impactful in the right regions. Insofar as you believe that there's such thing as a better and a worse ideology. I very much believe that that is the case. Now, we can all point out how ideologies are not heritable. Fair fucking game. But parental indoctrination is damn effective. Household indoctrination is damn effective. Scholastic indoctrination, damn effective. Theological indoctrination, you bet your bottom dollar it is more effective than you're giving it credit for once you venture outside of the West. Average non-Western society is far more cohesive in terms of in-group solidarity. If mommy and daddy believe in it, if it makes them feel good, it becomes a part of my identity. You don't see much of that in the West. In the West, we sort of put nonconformism on a pedestal, as we should. It's very admirable to do, right? Just in that ideal evaluation sense, it's very admirable to do. The more disconformist, not just nonconformist, the more disconformist you are, the more individually inclined you are. People think individualism is this ruggedness thing. No, it's not that. It's just about being your own person and not falling for social mimicry or any sort of familial collectivism. So it's admirable, but it's one thing to say that it's admirable, and it's another thing to say, well, it's going to actually lead to a consequential benefit. I'm not so sure that it will. Dogma is the power play of the in-group. It has always been the power play of the in-group. So if you choose, oh, yeah, let's stick to the West. Let's depopulate the West further. Let's bemoan the fact that we're not popularizing our ideas and thus depopulating the West further. Okay, so then what's the world going to look like 50 years from now? A century from now? Right? When it comes time for you to venture out, so let's say the West, let's say you're successful and the West gets anti-nataled. And the population demographics are even far more imbalanced as they are now. And then what? You're going to wage some sort of a war on a population that outnumbers you by orders of magnitude? It's either you're going to do that or you're going to remain full-fledged non-interventionist, in which case you're just giving the keys to the ideological kingdom to worse ideologies. Unless you can actually point me to something of a trend that shows social cohesiveness and conformity, that it's actually going to be stamped out in these non-Western nations. Oh, who am I kidding? In these Muslim majority nations. Indoctrination is a hell of a drug. Again, they're not born to be Muslims. They are swindled into being Muslims. And it's working. And so you're focusing on the wrong things. And maybe I'm making the category error here because I'm looking at my viewing demographics whenever I log on to things like YouTube and Blogger and the other sites I utilized. But like when I do log into those things, I'm noticing that the overwhelming majority of the people that are listening to what I'm saying are Western people. And I can tell by the comment sections, I can tell by the countries that populate on the map. A couple of exceptions in the Far East, but no one who's listening to me is the ideal candidate. Like, I know what would happen if I were to make some sort of a cultural dint. Like, people ask me, well, why don't you do anti-natalism videos? Well, I was like, I almost don't want to make a cultural dint on the odd chance that I do, right? I might just worsen an already existing problem. And that's insofar as you care about the far future. Maybe you don't care about the far future. Maybe you just believe that procreation is impermissible and that's the end of it. So you don't even care about what your audience is right now, and you don't care about what your prospective audience, who it's going to be composed of. I very much care. And the likelihood is there for all of us to assess. It's not a mystery. There's a certain type of neurological profile that's drawn to these ideas. And it just so happens that those types of people are the best candidates for procreation because they're not going to indoctrinate the ever-living fuck out of their kids, on average. And so we are caught in this weird maze that we're probably not going to be able to walk out of by keeping our integrity intact. And the full-blown integrity would be to just say that, well, procreation is wrong no matter who does it. Well, tough shit. I care about the far future. And I know that there is a neurological profile there. There's no such thing as a perfect candidate for procreation. All candidates for procreation are imperfect. But there are better and worse ones. And many of these better ones are going to be the ones that you're actually not going to want to dissuade. You're going to want to dissuade the worst ones. So I'm just fed up with this uptick that I'm noticing about the just constant decrying that the agenda hasn't taken off. If the agenda takes off, the first people you're going to dissuade are the best candidates. Not the perfect candidates. There's no such thing as a perfect candidate. The best candidates. The least imperfect candidates. And you're either going to have idiocracy in the IQ sense, or you're going to have belief set-based idiocracy. Religiosity. Things of that nature. How do you just hand-wave that? Well, the only way to hand-wave it is to be some type of a deontologist. It's to believe that there is a moral duty to not procreate and to convince as many people as possible to not procreate, no matter where they are. Like if they're the locals, well then so be it. They'll be the locals. By George, looks like even this one cuts off shortly after 30 minutes. So I think it's time for me to, after well over a decade, buy a new camcorder. But for now, I'll just put the finishing touches on the phone. I think it was actually maybe the lack of space, not the lack of the ability to record for over 30 minutes. I guess I'll find out soon enough. But this is just going to be finishing touches. I believe I was talking about, before the phone rudely interrupted me, how it's not morally impermissible to procreate. It's just probabilistically worse depending on what region you find yourself in, but also us having to scale the long-term impact. And this is not that much of a departure from a point I made a year and a half ago that most people were actually fairly receptive to. All you have to do to be fairly receptive of this point is to realize that vehement is philosophically fatuous. Like the end goals of vehement are the end goals of deep ecology, ecocentrism, biocentrism, all these concerns that extend more to species and ecosystems, like abstractions, than they do to sentient organisms as individuals. Right, so they're not sentiocentric views, but they're also not human-centric, but they are nonetheless some sort of a mishmash of ecocentrism and biocentrism. Maybe even Gaia, right? So I railed against vehement, and it was well received. I think this was in my dual consequentialism video back in January 2016. Like most people got it and agreed. And when you really look at it, that same type of critique applies to this. Does it not? Think about what vehement wanted. Like if vehement could have it their way, if they can commandeer time, they would retroactively wipe us out prior to 1970, because many of these mass extinctions and the ecocide that's taking place to this very day, much of it started due to extractivism and industrialism, which has human fingerprints all over it, and much of it continues to last from 1970 onwards. So if they could have had it their way, they would have had humans go extinct prior to 1970. And I would have said, well, no, because the ecocide, as brutal as the ecocide is, WWF, the World Wildlife Fund, has done assessments and showed that there were twice as much wild animals in natural habitats prior to 1970 than there are today. Now maybe twice as much is a bit too much of a sloppy assessment. Maybe it's somewhere closer to 35% or 45%. People have done additional analysis of that, but nonetheless, that's nothing to sneeze at. The prospect that there was twice as much and would have probably remained that much had human beings not been here to fiddle with the Earth's resources. Right? So I'm saying it's probably a good thing that we stuck around. But none of that means that you have to give any sort of moral praise to individuals that procreated in the lead up to 1970 and from 1970 onwards. And neither does it mean that you have to apply any sort of social censure to individuals who didn't procreate in the lead up to 1970 and from 1970 onwards. Because no one actually procreated with that goal in mind, so you have to assess the goal, right? You have to look at people who are saying, well, fuck the ecocide, I don't give a damn about animals anyway. Human supremacism. It's like, okay, that's a view, I suppose, but what does it mean to say, fuck the ecocide? Well, it's probably an inconsiderate thing to say, but then you can also view it from a different angle. Well, what does it mean to say, stop the ecocide? Well, it probably means to be some sort of a biocentrist or an ecocentrist, right? Vehement, deep ecology type views. The view that it is impermissible for unborn, non-human sentient organisms to remain unborn, or aka to go extinct. That's a morally addled view, I contend. So, as brutal as the ecocide is, just think about the world in 2017 that would have had something close to twice as much, or maybe exactly twice as much, wildlife organisms, natural habitats, bountiful with life, aka bountiful with diseases, predation, starvation, and a slew of other negative things that I wouldn't want to sign up for. We can get into it further with our selection-based procreative strategies. Nothing particularly fun about that. Thousands dying prior to reaching maturity, so that a handful can reach maturity. It's quite the lopsided travesty. And it's not like there's a tiny minority of our selected species. There's a non-trivial number, a number that we just can't neglect. So you show me the ecocide, I can say, well, it's something that's not prescriptively wrong, even though it is from a anticipated consequences based perspective. It's like no one did it, no one procreated for those reasons. So it doesn't warrant praise, but it doesn't exactly mean that it ought not to have happened. And when you look at that applied to the topic of ecocide, you can also apply the very same sort of thinking to this whole theme of this video, what I'm talking about right now. Better and worse belief sets. So if someone is choosing to repopulate the West, let's just say, have Western birth rates on average trump non-Western birth rates on average, they might be doing it for all sorts of sketchy reasons, but nonetheless, insofar as we can agree that certain Western trends will continue to be the trends in the way of nonconformism, in the way of independent thought, in the way of intellectual freedom. It's far more prevalent in the average Western society than it is in the average Muslim majority society. Then those are indirectly good. The agent who wishes to have a sort of this current defanged natalism no longer be defanged, they're not doing it for noble reasons, but that's not exactly of primary concern. What sort of gears they have running in their minds, we got to look at what will happen as a result of that 50 years from now. What kind of intergroup dynamics are we going to be left with 50 years from now, 100 years from now, if their agenda wins out? Of course, we don't want to, it's still good to have a defanged natalist cultural attitude, but I'm afraid it may be too defanged as it is. Not because natalism itself is noble or wise or ethical. We don't have to give an inch to any of that. any of those traditional mindset. You don't have to give an inch to them in order to still recognize that we still have to one extent or another, keep up with the true lunatics. The true moral lunatics, let's just say. Insofar as you care about who will inherit the keys to the ideological kingdom. And maybe you don't care. Maybe for some percent of my viewers, and I'm really interested in this, maybe we should all get to the bottom of it. Maybe for some percent of the viewers, it's just flat out impermissible to procreate or to in any way tolerate procreation, regardless of the particulars behind it, regardless of the likelihoods of what kind of ideology you're going to boost or minimize. Like, maybe some percent of my viewers just simply don't care about any of that stuff. Maybe the only consideration is just the act itself ought to be a morally taboo act. And maybe calling it taboo is giving it, like, putting it too mildly. Maybe it's, yeah, it's unacceptable in every sense of the term of unacceptable. But then why would it stop with that? Why wouldn't any other type of instrumentalization? Because I think that's the main problem with procreation, is that it instrumentalizes an individual for the benefit of another individual, or at least the imagined benefit of another individual, right? But why would that just be extended to procreation only? Why not extend it to something in the way of suicide or any of these other act types that, I'll tie it back to deontology, like usually deontology specializes in saying that it just simply doesn't matter what the results are, how beneficial they are. These act types should never happen. So if that's fatuous when it comes to this, and that, why can't it also be fatuous under certain circumstances when it comes to procreation itself? Why is procreative instrumentalization its own type of evil beast? I'm saying no, it's not. It's on par with any of these other things. Any act type can be justified when the circumstances are bizarre enough. And the current circumstances when it comes to the lopsidedness of the birth rates are bizarre. I wouldn't want them to be bizarre. I'd like them to be nicely balanced, but they're just not. So, don't shoot the fucking messenger. And don't conflate any of this shit for neo-reaction or alt-light, as they call it, number of people. It's like any type of political implication will be second order, or maybe not even second order, like third order. I'm just saying, put on the brakes, ask yourself not just who is the current audience, but who is your expected audience, and ask yourself, I think this is the best way to end it actually, if you had a significant other who was a multimillionaire or maybe even a billionaire, but who was not a philanthropist, who actually hated philanthropy, but who really wanted to get hitched with you, and who didn't want to do a prenup or anything of the sort, who would be okay with a mutual bank account once you get married, and who wouldn't care how you spend half of their money once you get access to it. Let's say it's a multimillionaire. It's been your significant other for a long time, been in a relationship, wants to get hitched under the condition that you impregnate them, right? Or if you're a female watching this, is like under the condition that the male impregnates you, your prospective husband, your soon-to-be husband. And if you're a male watching this, your soon-to-be wife, right? So they would give you, you would gain access to millions upon millions of dollars with the price tag of being culpable in a single procreative act. You would bring a being into existence. Right? You get to do all kinds of good by having, by way of now familial ties, marital ties, access to a multimillionaire's bank account. And a multimillionaire who does not want to spend a single penny on philanthropy, who will spend all of their money on their own indulgences, but who, paradoxically enough, doesn't mind if you spend half their savings on whatever the fuck you want to do. Now let's say what you want to do is something in the way of effective altruism. Who would be insane enough to decline such a marriage just because the catch, the condition on the marriage is, yeah, you're going to have to be a biological daddy? Hands up right now if you would still decline that. I want to know, I want to weed out the individuals who would still decline that, because procreation is just so uniquely impermissible, unlike anything else. Like, most people here will understand having clean hands, like the statement, let justice be done, though the heavens may fall. Like, most of us can understand that's a sanctimonious statement. But why should it be any different when it comes to cracking a single egg in a procreative sense, when it comes to the sort of setup that I just presented here? I'd fucking do it. If there was no other way to make a huge impact, if I know that there's no other way for me to get my hands on millions, perhaps billions, and that I know how much good those millions can do, if the only way to do so is to marry a bitch who wants me to impregnate her, I'd fucking hold my nose and do it. There's nothing unique about instrumentalization via procreation. If you grant that in the microcosm case that I just presented, and if you can grant that when it comes to vehement being stupid for wanting humanity to go extinct prior to 1970 because of the ecocide being bad in their view, if you can grant that to those two cases, the first case and the vehement case, why can't we grant it when it comes to this population war right now? This thing that's been presented as the clash of civilizations. I don't understand. I don't understand in the slightest. It seems like special pleading. It really does. Perhaps you've put too much stock into a given ism. We see it happen with so many people. People put too much stock into things like pacifism. People put all kinds of stock into anarchism. The problem with political ideologies in general, and people not really thinking about real politic and instead indulging ideologies. That's sort of what I'm seeing with fellow critics of procreation. And this is just my pitch to cut it out. And I will be eagerly viewing any sort of negative feedback, but let's just keep it above the belt. Because Lord knows no one else on the internet is keeping anything above the belt these days. It's like 10% constructive criticism, 90% below the belt. Maybe I was a bit insulting with this. It's not my intention to do that, but I'd like to think that I kept it mostly constructive. So let's have a productive back and forth on this, because we need to get past this idea that we are uniquely better simply because we don't have kids. It's not the case. We are uniquely more understanding that intolerable suffering cannot be traded off for any sort of infinite positive benefit. I think that's what we want to get to. But that's a state of affairs type assessment. It is not an act type based assessment. Certain state of affairs can be morally impermissible even if there's nothing in them that contains a unacceptable act. Everything that's happened on planet Earth from abiogenesis up until Homo sapiens arrived on the scene can probably be categorized as that. An unacceptable state of affairs that nonetheless doesn't contain a single impermissible moral act. Alright, well, I think I've done enough damage.